Ethan had spent 3 years building a future with Lauren, believing she was the woman he would stand beside for the rest of his life. Their wedding plans were nearly complete, invitations sent, families excited, and Ethan felt confident that everything was finally falling into place. But everything changed when Lauren casually announced that she wanted to invite her ex, Brandon, to the wedding. She brushed off Ethan's confusion with a simple sentence that froze him in place. "If we love each other, we should trust each other." The way she said it felt too practiced, too defensive, and Ethan couldn't shake the cold knot forming in his stomach. Why would she even need her ex there, on the most important day of their lives? Even worse, she insisted on it in a way that made Ethan realize this wasn't just about trust. Something deeper and darker was hiding underneath. Ethan tried to brush off the uneasy feeling at first, telling himself that love required maturity and that he couldn't be the jealous type who panicked over something harmless. But the longer he thought about it, the more the situation gnawed at him, like a splinter buried too deep to ignore. Lauren wasn't just inviting an old friend from school or a distant acquaintance. She wanted her ex there, at their wedding, watching her walk down the aisle to marry someone else. Ethan kept replaying that one sentence in his mind, the sentence that stuck to him like cold glue. "If we love each other, we should trust each other." It sounded reasonable, yet the tone she used felt like she was hiding something behind the logic. It wasn't the sentence that frightened him. It was the way she said it, almost as if she had prepared the line before he even reacted. That night, while Lauren was asleep, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing faster than his heartbeat. He tried to convince himself he was imagining things, that he was overthinking, but he had learned long ago that intuition rarely flared up without a cause. The next morning, Lauren claimed she had been in contact with Brandon simply because his wife was overseas, and she didn't want him to attend the wedding alone. Something about that explanation felt too clean, too rehearsed. Like she had prepared it in advance, waiting to deliver it the moment he questioned her motives. Ethan walked away from the conversation without arguing, keeping his voice calm, but inside he felt something crack, the kind of quiet break that doesn't make noise but changes everything. Later that week, Lauren left her phone on the kitchen counter while showering, and Ethan's eyes fell on a notification lighting up the screen. It was a message from Brandon, but what shook Ethan the most was the tone. There were too many winking emojis, too many late-night timestamps, and even just from the preview window, Ethan could tell these weren't the simple, friendly messages she described. He tried not to look. He really did. But the message preview displayed the final straw. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You looked incredible." Ethan felt his breath stop in his chest. His pulse pounded in his ears, and for a moment he simply stood frozen, hoping he had misread it. He unlocked the phone and scrolled through their messages. There were compliments about her body, inside jokes that clearly hadn't faded with time, and long conversations that stretched past midnight. They reminisced about their time together, shared intimate thoughts, and hinted that things between them weren't as over as Lauren had claimed. Ethan felt a burning heat spread through his body, from betrayal, from humiliation, from the realization that she had not only lied, but done so while acting righteous, and offended at the idea that he was being insecure. He continued scrolling and discovered something worse. Brandon's wife was not overseas at all. She was still living in the same city, completely unaware of the secret conversations her husband was having with another woman. Lauren had lied directly to Ethan's face, and the truth revealed itself with the elegance of a knife slipping between ribs. Ethan stood there with the phone in his hand, and the world seemed to go painfully silent. He knew then that his instincts had been right all along. Ethan didn't say anything to Lauren immediately. He couldn't trust himself to speak without shaking, and he didn't want to confront her without knowing the full extent of what he was facing. He spent the next day pretending everything was normal, going through the motions, answering wedding planning questions, nodding at dress fittings and menu discussions, while inside he was planning his next move. He had one name stuck in his mind the entire time: Megan, Brandon's wife. If anyone deserved the truth besides him, it was her. He thought for hours about whether he was crossing a line, whether it was his place to involve her. But every time he replayed Brandon's messages in his head, the answer became clearer. Megan wasn't just collateral damage in someone else's drama. She was a woman being lied to just as much as he was. So Ethan sat down at his laptop that evening, opened social media, and searched for her profile. Her account wasn't private, and it didn't take long to confirm he was looking at the right person. There were pictures of her and Brandon together, smiling, hiking, celebrating anniversaries, and living what looked like a happy life. Ethan stared at the photos and felt something heavy twist in his chest. She had no idea. He hesitated before typing the first message, fingers hovering above the keys while 1,000 doubts spun through his head. What if she didn't believe him? What if she accused him of lying or stirring trouble before the wedding? What if this whole situation made everything even more complicated and painful? But the alternative, staying silent and letting both of them walk blindly into disaster, felt like the greater betrayal. So he typed a simple, respectful message, trying not to sound emotional or frantic. He didn't blame her. He didn't accuse Brandon outright. He simply explained who he was, that he was engaged to Lauren, and that something had come to his attention which he believed she needed to know. He pressed send and sat back, his heart pounding. The reply came faster than he expected. Megan responded within minutes, polite but clearly confused, asking what he meant and why he was reaching out. Ethan took a deep breath and told her the truth. Not exaggerated. Not dramatized. Just the facts, along with screenshots of the messages he had seen. He expected anger, disbelief, maybe even denial, but Megan was calmer than he imagined. There was a painful pause in the conversation before she finally wrote back that she had also felt something was off with Brandon lately. He had been distant, taking late-night calls, guarding his phone more than usual, and making excuses about late meetings at work. But she never imagined the reason would be Lauren. Ethan could almost feel the weight of her realization through the screen. Then, in the most unexpected twist, Megan asked to meet. Not for a confrontation, not for drama, but simply to talk face-to-face. Ethan agreed, and they met later that week in a quiet cafe, two strangers connected by betrayal and disbelief. They went over everything together, comparing notes, timelines, messages, and behaviors, and the picture became painfully clear. Brandon and Lauren weren't just reminiscing. They were still emotionally attached, possibly planning something far beyond subtle flirting. Then Megan said something that changed the direction of everything. She suggested attending the upcoming wedding rehearsal as Ethan's guest. If they wanted the truth, they wouldn't have to force it. They would just have to show up and watch it unravel. Ethan sat back in his chair, stunned, realizing this wasn't just about surviving a betrayal anymore. It was about exposing it in the one place neither of them expected. The rehearsal dinner was held at a charming venue decorated with soft lights, white linens, and floral centerpieces that were supposed to symbolize romance and the beginning of a beautiful marriage. Ethan walked in with Megan beside him, both of them composed on the outside, but carrying a storm of truth underneath. No one suspected anything at first. Family members smiled, friends clapped him on the back, and people were only puzzled by the unfamiliar woman standing next to him. Lauren was across the room laughing with her bridesmaids, her face glowing with the confidence of someone convinced her secrets were safe. She turned, spotted Ethan, and then froze the moment she saw Megan standing with him. The smile vanished from her face as fast as a candle being blown out. Megan held her posture, calm, polite, not making a scene. That expression alone made Lauren more nervous than if Megan had stormed in screaming. Lauren approached them with forced composure, voice tight and light at the same time, asking who Ethan had brought. Before Ethan could speak, Megan introduced herself with measured calm, stating her full name and that she was Brandon's wife. Conversation stopped in a 5-foot radius as people overheard. Lauren's face went pale, then red, then pale again, cycling through panic, guilt, and the realization that the walls were closing in. Brandon arrived a moment later, carrying a glass of wine and laughing with one of Ethan's cousins, completely unaware that his life was about to tilt off its axis. He saw the three of them standing together and went rigid, like someone had pulled a chair out from under him. Megan turned to him with the kind of steady look that communicated she already knew everything. There were no raised voices, no dramatic shouting, just the slow, public unspooling of a hidden truth. Ethan quietly pulled out his phone and set it on the table, screen lighting up with the messages he had discovered. Lauren tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and Brandon's eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape route. Megan didn't yell. She revealed the facts calmly, line by painful line, describing the late-night messages, the secret phone calls, and the excuses Brandon had been giving her. When Ethan added the screenshots confirming that Lauren had lied about Megan being abroad, murmurs began spreading through the tables. People who had been laughing seconds before were now staring, leaning in, listening, and whispering. The rehearsal dinner had transformed from a celebration into a slow-motion car crash no one could look away from. One of Lauren's bridesmaids asked if this was some misunderstanding, but the evidence was stacked too neatly to deny. Lauren's mother sat down heavily at the table, looking like she'd aged years in a minute. Brandon tried to defend himself, stammering that it wasn't what it looked like, but even he didn't sound convinced. Then an older uncle softly asked the question hanging in everyone's mind. If nothing was wrong, why hide these conversations and sneak around? Silence followed. The uncomfortable, undeniable kind. Lauren's throat bobbed as she swallowed, eyes shining with fear, embarrassment, and the realization that the truth had escaped her control. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than anger ever could. People continued eating and drinking, but the atmosphere was different, heavy, electric, like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. By the time dessert was served, the illusion of a perfect wedding had shattered for everyone in the room, and there was no going back. Lauren stood motionless as the room around her fell into a stunned hush, eyes darting from the evidence on the table to the shocked faces watching her. She looked like someone trying to hold sand in her hands as it slipped through her fingers, unable to stop what was happening. Finally, she pulled Ethan aside and insisted they speak privately, though the damage had already spread through the room like smoke. They stepped into a quiet hallway outside the dining room, but Ethan remained silent, waiting for her to explain. Lauren took a deep breath, then another, her eyes darting everywhere except his. She began by saying that she didn't mean to betray him, that everything had gotten complicated, and that she had been confused. Ethan listened, expression unreadable. Then, unable to avoid it any longer, Lauren finally admitted the truth. She confessed that she wasn't inviting Brandon for the sake of friendship or trust or shared history. She had wanted him at the wedding because she wasn't sure she was ready to let him go. She explained that the wedding was supposed to be her final test, a way to see whether she truly wanted to marry Ethan or whether part of her still wanted a life with her ex. Ethan felt the words hit him like blows delivered slowly, one after another, each leaving a new bruise. Everything she had done suddenly made sense, but in the worst possible way. The messages, the secrecy, the defensiveness, the practiced lines, it wasn't miscommunication. It was indecision dressed as commitment. He asked her one question, his voice calm but shaking at the edges. Why hadn't she told him this before announcing their engagement, before planning a wedding, before involving two families and thousands of dollars? Lauren didn't have an answer. She stared at the floor, breathing unevenly, hands twisting together as she tried to pull together some explanation that didn't make her look heartless. She said she needed time. She said she had been afraid. She said she wanted to be sure before making such a big life decision. But none of her excuses changed the reality. She had used their wedding, a commitment Ethan believed in wholeheartedly, as a personal emotional experiment. Ethan stood in silence for a long time, the weight of her confession pressing down on him. He realized he wasn't just dealing with infidelity. He was dealing with someone who had never fully chosen him. Finally, he straightened his posture, wiped the emotion from his expression, and told her clearly that the wedding was off. There was no yelling, no scene, just finality. He informed her that since she had been the one lying, manipulating, and turning the wedding into something it was never meant to be, her family would be responsible for reimbursing him for the $18,000 he had already paid in deposits and preparations. Lauren stared at him in horror, not expecting him to move so decisively. She had assumed there would be tears, arguments, or pleas for compromise. Instead, she was met with a calm dismissal that left her powerless. When they returned to the rehearsal dinner, Ethan didn't hide what had happened. He thanked everyone for attending, announced that the wedding was canceled, and excused himself with quiet dignity. Lauren stood frozen in front of her family, the entire room staring at her with a mixture of disbelief, pity, and quiet judgment. The truth was out. The engagement was over. And the consequences of her test had finally arrived. Lauren's world fell apart faster than she could gather the pieces, and the aftermath began almost immediately. As Ethan walked away from the rehearsal dinner, she stood frozen in the center of the room, surrounded by murmurs and the heavy silence of people who had witnessed a disaster unfold in real time. She tried to hold herself together in front of the guests, but as soon as the evening ended, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she called Ethan repeatedly, but he didn't answer. He had nothing left to say. By the next morning, panic turned into desperation, and Lauren rushed to social media hoping to control the story before it spread. She posted vague messages about betrayal, heartbreak, promises broken, and how she had been wronged by someone she trusted. She painted herself as the victim. Hopping friends and acquaintances would rush to her defense. Some did it first, offering sympathy and standing by her without having the full story. But Megan had already anticipated this and wasn't willing to let Lauren twist the truth. With calm, factual clarity, Megan released the screenshots and timeline that showed exactly what had happened. She didn't add insults. She didn't embellish anything. She simply put the truth out into the world. Suddenly, the tone online shifted. People who had defended Lauren fell silent. Others began commenting with cautious questions, wondering why she had hidden such significant details. A few pointed out that if she had truly been the innocent one, there would be no reason for Brandon's late-night messages or secret conversations. Lauren deleted her posts and tried again with new explanations, but the internet moves fast when evidence is clear. Her claims collapsed under the weight of receipts. Meanwhile, her parents were dealing with the practical fallout. $18,000 in deposits was no small amount, and Ethan had every legal right to demand reimbursement, especially given the circumstances. At first, Lauren's family resisted, insisting that emotions had run high and that everyone should take a few days to calm down. But once Ethan's screenshots circulated privately among close relatives, the reality became impossible to deny. The lies had come from Lauren, not Ethan. The consequences were hers to face. Her mother cried, her father stared at the floor in exhausted embarrassment, and the family finally agreed to pay back the full amount. They preferred swallowing the cost over allowing the scandal to grow even larger. Lauren tried reaching out to Brandon for comfort, but he was too busy dealing with his own collapsing world. Megan had confronted him directly, and their marriage was now teetering on the edge of divorce. He didn't have time to hold Lauren's hand or help her craft excuses. He was trying to save what little remained of his own life. Lauren found herself alone, caught between two destroyed relationships and a public that no longer believed her story. She had gambled with two marriages, thinking she could explore lingering feelings without consequences. Instead, she lost everything: her engagement, her reputation, her dignity, and the illusion that she had control. As the days passed, the reality settled in. There was no fixing this. No twist of narrative could erase the screenshots, the messages, or the cold truth that she had been willing to risk a lifelong commitment just to see how she felt. What had started as an internal conflict had become a public reckoning, and by the time the drama settled, everyone involved had learned that emotional games come with very real costs. While Lauren tried to salvage her public image, Megan quietly continued piecing together the rest of the truth with a calm determination that came from shock turning into clarity. She wasn't satisfied with just knowing about the affair. She wanted to understand how far Brandon and Lauren had gone, how deep the betrayal really ran, and whether there were more hidden layers she hadn't seen yet. One evening, while Brandon was in the shower, Megan noticed that his personal phone was left unattended on the counter. But the strange part was the second, older phone lying halfway tucked under a towel, as if he had tried to hide it in haste. Her heart tightened, and she picked it up. The screen was unlocked, and what she found confirmed everything Ethan had feared. This wasn't just occasional messaging or emotional flirting. The second phone held an entire world Brandon had built to conceal his contact with Lauren. There were messages about late-night rendezvous, shared fantasies about their second chance, and even conversations about what they might do if the wedding actually went through. The most damning discovery was a thread outlining a plan that made Megan's stomach twist. Lauren and Brandon had discussed objecting during the ceremony, confronting the priest and guests, and begging Lauren to reconsider her marriage on the spot. In some messages, they even wrote about running away together after the wedding, leaving the reception like star-crossed lovers reclaiming their lost destiny. It was the kind of thing teenagers wrote in notebooks, not two adults prepared to destroy two households. Megan sat down slowly, the room spinning around her as she realized that the chaos at the rehearsal dinner had only prevented something even more humiliating and destructive. She didn't confront Brandon immediately. Instead, she took photos of everything: messages, call logs, dates, even the timestamps that proved Lauren and Ethan's wedding wasn't the only thing being prepared. Then she slipped the phone back into place and walked out of the room with the silent poise of someone who had suddenly become stronger than her pain. Later that night, when Brandon emerged from the bathroom, Megan met him in the living room. Her face was unreadable, her voice calm, and she simply started reading the messages aloud one after another. Brandon froze. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He didn't even try to twist the story. He just sat there with his head in his hands as the weight of his choices crushed him. Within days, divorce papers were drawn up. Megan wasn't interested in forgiveness or counseling. She wasn't going to fight loudly or dramatically. She simply chose to walk away with dignity, taking only what she legally deserved and leaving the rest behind. Brandon, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. In the divorce settlement, he lost nearly everything: financial assets, property leverage, and any moral standing he once had. His family was disappointed, friends pulled back, and the people who once admired him now saw him as a man who had used deception to chase a fantasy. Lauren, meanwhile, spiraled further. With her engagement publicly ruined and Brandon unavailable to support her, she clung to the idea that she could still fix things. She tried calling Brandon, texting him, begging him not to abandon her the same way she had abandoned others. But the reality was that they had destroyed their bridges at the same time, and neither had anything left to cling to. Meanwhile, Ethan moved on with a quiet maturity that impressed everyone who knew him. He didn't trash Lauren online. He didn't gloat. He simply stepped out of the situation and redirected his life toward peace. He returned deposits, changed personal plans, and took time to breathe again. And with each passing day, he grew more grateful that he had discovered the truth before standing at the altar, promising vows to someone who wasn't truly his. Megan also found strength she didn't know she had. She finalized her divorce, moved out, and focused on rebuilding a life that no longer included secrecy or emotional manipulation. She and Ethan eventually became friends, not out of romance, but mutual respect forged in shared survival. By the time the dust settled, everything had been revealed. The double lives, the secret phone, the planned disruption, the lies packaged as logic, all of it was exposed. And the lessons left behind were etched deep into everyone involved. Some people lose everything because they can't choose one path and commit to it. Others survive because they walk away when the truth demands it. Ethan stood outside the venue after the ceremony, the cool air filling his lungs as the noise of the crowd faded behind him. The celebration was in full swing, yet he needed a moment away to understand what he had just witnessed. Lauren was gone, choosing a man from her past over the life they had planned, and Ethan felt the surreal calm that follows the end of something that once felt permanent. He realized that the truth had freed him rather than destroyed him. The wedding had not collapsed because of a lack of love from his side, but because he had been the only one still holding on. He thought about the years he had invested, the dreams he had built, and how quickly they had dissolved once honesty had been forced into the light. As he walked away, he felt no anger, only clarity. He had lost Lauren, but he had found the truth, and that would guide him toward a future built on something real.